on our new book. We're on a new book on page 5. You need a book today?
I needed
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that's no problem. That's why we have our class copies for ones that bring you back. Okay, thank you. Page 5. We're in the middle of page 5 with that sentence, that paragraph that starts with, "What's more, atheists cannot logically argue that the universe is eternal." What we're studying here, again, is 7 reasons to believe in God. When we go out into the world and we're talking to different people about God, we're going to run into a lot of different people that's not going to agree with what the Bible says. So when you're dealing with people that do not believe in the Bible, it's next to impossible to teach them a scripture. So you can't say Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, because we're dealing with non-believers. We're dealing with people that do not know God. So what we're dealing with here in the very beginning of this book is how to be able to talk to people that do not know God, that believe in no God, that believe that scientists are correct and that their atheist belief is correct, and that life comes from the Big Bang, or life comes from nothing. But here, the author here is going to help us to get a clear picture of our side as logic. How could it be that you could have something from nothing? And that's really what it comes down to. Because they themselves, as scientists, believe that you can't have something from nothing, but they're going to argue that we got something from nothing because that's interesting. That's the words they're going to use. That it's interesting how that can be. Okay, everybody got a book?
Yes.
Whoa, we're doing good today. How about a volunteer reader? Thank you, Steve.
What's more, atheists cannot logically argue that the universe is eternal. It seems that relatively few scientists even propose an eternal universe anymore. In fact, there would be no point in attempting to explain the beginning of the universe and a Big Bang if atheists believed it always existed. Furthermore, the second law of thermodynamics, which states that matter and energy become less usable over time, has led most scientists to conclude that the universe has not always existed, else we would be out of usable energy. The fact is, the universe had a beginning. Alex Valentin, cosmologist from Tufts University, pressed this fact in his book titled Many Worlds in One. It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof of what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning.
Why don't you go into the next paragraph too?
At one time in the past, the material universe did not exist. Then, at some point, matter came into existence. But since matter is not eternal and cannot create itself from nothing, then something outside of the material realm must have brought matter into existence.
Okay, in this particular paragraph, starting with page 5, it talks about the second law of thermodynamics, that whatever is in existence, which states that the matter and energy becoming less usable over time. It means that it has to wear itself out. It's going to be used up. And that's what they're talking about here in the second law of thermodynamics. And because this is scientists that have created this law, what it does is it contradicts itself. Because now they can't say that it's actually always existed. Because those are different positions that people will take. That the earth came through the Big Bang, number one. Number two here is that it's always existed. And this second law of thermodynamics, hard time spitting it out, says that things are going to be wearing down. So science is actually disproving their own thoughts and their own theories about where the earth has been or how the universe has been eternal. It's been ongoing, and it's not true. Because again, we that are Bible readers know that in the beginning was the Word. I want to turn our Bibles to what I was said we was going to do is that we're going to go into the third day of creation. So I'd like to ask for a volunteer to read Genesis chapter 1, verse 9 to 13. Each time that we're actually studying this book, we want to kind of touch on what the Bible actually says about creation, because God says this is how it works. You know, it's interesting because if you look at Genesis chapter 1, if you look at the very first verse, either you're going to believe in God or you're not going to believe in God. Because it says in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. It's either you're going to believe that or you're not going to believe it. And that, well, determine whether you're going to believe anything else that comes afterwards. Because if you can't believe that, then everything else is you're going to be just nitpicking on what you want to believe. And people do that. People will believe that, well, you know, God maybe created the heavens and the earth, and then from there on, you know, we have millions of years of evolution. Or people think that the evolution gap, they call it, where the first day was a million years or a billion years, and the second day was a million years or a billion years, and they're trying to stick things in between to try to make it fit into science. And either you believe in God and you believe in His Word completely, and that's the key words, completely, or you're going to try to let scientists add words to the actual Scriptures. And we know that we should never add or take away from the Bible. We should never add or take away from the Bible. Either it is or it isn't. Either I believe it or I don't. It's real simple. Okay? Volunteer? Okay, you want to volunteer? What were you saying?
I was going to make a comment. This is like sort of like the same kind of a issue that Paul had with the Athenians when he mentioned the resurrection of the dead. Some believed, some didn't, but it's the same kind of concept. You believe it or you don't.
Right. Yeah. Acts chapter 17, when he was at Mars Hill waiting for his other brethren to come around. He was walking around Mars Hill, was looking around at all the inscriptions, and it was a very pagan world at that time. And when he started to preach on God and who God was, and when he went from God, he went straight to Jesus. From there, either they believed or they didn't believe. But let's stay back on the text here. Let's go back to Genesis chapter 1. Did somebody here volunteer to read? Go ahead. Verse 9 to 13.
And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear, and it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit yielding fruit, and the fruits yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day.
Thank you. The third day is really interesting because it talks about everything reproducing itself.
Right.
Everything reproduces itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have grass that puts out the same grass. We have trees that put out the same type of fruit or fruitful type of tree, or anything that was life-bearing would reproduce itself. Even though man wasn't made yet, the concept of reproduction was always going to be that the things in the earth, everything that's living is going to reproduce of its own kind. It doesn't teach that things change. Because getting back to a couple of weeks ago, one of the things I said was, if I have a rock, right, is that rock going to turn into a human being? And Sister Rosa first answered, no. And that's true. How could it be? How could you take a rock and all of a sudden you got a human? Right? Well, you know, like if we stand here and wait 14 billion years, it will happen, right? You think so?
No.
Of course not. Right? And here we're talking about life from water to fish. Well, how did they come around? Well, it just happened. And then they crawled into land and they didn't need the water anymore. How did that happen? It just happened. And then he started crawling around. Then he started climbing on trees. How did that happen? Well, it just happened. It's interesting. You just got to believe it. You got to have faith. That's what they'll tell you. Right? We need to understand that God said everything is going to reproduce of its own kind. Every human, every tree, every grass, every animal, every fish, reptile, bird, everything is going to reproduce its own kind. Nothing changed. And that's what they're trying to convince us. There's no proof of that. There is no proof that there was nothing and all of a sudden there's one cell. Then this one cell became two cells. What did the one cell eat for dinner? To become a two cell. I mean, think about it. I mean, it sounds silly, right? But think about that. How do you have one cell and all of a sudden it becomes two cells? And how many cells do we have? Oh, you know the answer to that one? I don't.
Yeah, I mean, they would say randomness.
Right.
Randomly happens, so which leads them to
Right.
believe then you can randomly.
Right, it just happens. And they would use words like, well, that's interesting. That's interesting how it happens. Right? And they should say that if you believe that, I got some real estate, I'll sell you down to South Florida with swampland. They should have said that too. But what we want to believe is what God tells us. And that's really the key. What does God tell us about creation? What did God tell us from the beginning? What happened in the beginning? How did it all come to be? Well, God told us how it happens. That's why the book of Genesis, starting with the first verse, is so important. Because if you believe that, we can keep on reading. If you don't believe that, then you're just nitpicking. You're just picking on what you want to believe. And a lot of people do that. A lot of people do that. A lot of people that even embrace some form of denominationalism. Well, pick people that have high-level jobs in what they consider wisdom and knowledge and science and whatnot. They'll just pick and choose what they want to believe. And they'll argue that fact. Well, you know, I'm a scientist, so I believe that all that can happen. But, you know, I believe in God at the same time. But their God is not the God of the Bible. If they believe in the God of science. And that's what we're talking about here. Any comments on this paragraph that we just read? The second law of thermodynamics. You want to finish that little paragraph, Nick? You were reading?
Okay.
From the book?
From the book, yes, page 6. In short.
In short, matter demands a maker. The evidence clearly indicates that the cause of the universe is inexplicable without a supernatural being. Something has to be eternally powerful, but we know it cannot be natural or material. Romans chapter 1, verse 20 says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Without some type of eternal power, our universe cannot exist, and the atheistic answer that our universe created itself from nothing is the furthest thing from either a scientific or a rational explanation."
Science disproves their own theories. Okay, like I said before, this book has 7 reasons to believe in God. We just wrapped up the first one. Matter demands a maker. Matter does not just appear. The 25 pounds of matter that they're talking about out of nothing appears, and now we got this big bang, and everything is in order now because of an explosion. That cannot be. Because even the things that were taught here in this first section, cause and effect, first and second laws of thermodynamics, those are the things that the scientists will try to argue. That's why this is really interesting in this book, because if we're up against somebody that's got some type of science bachelor's degree or whatever it is, that's where they're going. That's where they're going to go. They're going to go into Big Bang. They're going to go into thermodynamics. And we need to know that there's a problem here. The problem is that it's contradicting themselves. Okay? Yes, Steve?
To me, the Big Bang Theory implies a finite universe, just like an explosion. I think it contradicts the concept of infinity.
Well, God said, let there be light. God said, he might have said, let there be light. Bang! He might have did that, right? We don't know, right? And if he did that, there might have been a bang in that sense, but only in the sense of what God said, right? And that bang could just been, like just things happening. I don't know. I'm not going to say that's the way it was, but I couldn't see a Big Bang any other way. Except that God said, this is the way it is. Right. He spoke it into existence. We find that from the Hebrew writers, chapter 1, verse 3.
Yeah, this is a good study because you do come across people that are like that are scientifically thinkers. But you know, what I have found, and it works for me every time, is I show them like the world was round way back when nobody knew anything, and I show them Psalms 8 verse 8 where the sea had pathways, and David pronounced that, and David never ever seen a sea. And then on you can go with different things, like there was dinosaurs in Job chapter 40 and 41, and they'll say, oh, you're kidding me. And then I'll show them that, and then that pokes their interest. The world's round, we didn't find it out till 1492, and here the Bible said it way thousands of years before that. And then the sea has pathways. We didn't find that out till, I don't know when we found that out, but it was way...
Just within a couple of hundred years when they realized that there are paths in the sea.
Yeah.
But see, we're jumping ahead of ourselves because
No, I'm just
all
saying
all that is in the next section. Why we believe the Bible, and the Bible is going to be, what you're saying, is going to prove itself about these things, about the world being round,
Yeah.
about the paths in the sea, about how the earth is just suspended out there,
Yeah.
how everything is just scientifically proven that these things exist, that again, science will prove the Bible. But that's in our next section. We're in the first section right now, so we want to stay with the non-believers. We're up against people that are like, even our own children that are going to school. Right? Our children are going to school. Our young people are going to school. And this is what they're being taught in colleges. Right? And that's why this first section has to be that we have to prove that God is God. And the second section is going to be when we can use the Bible. A non-believer is never going to open the Bible with you to let you show them, Genesis chapter 1 or Psalms chapter 8 or any of this. Because we have to be able to get to their understanding and their logic. And that's what this is about here. So that we work with them on the scientific level. That's why I said the beginning of this book doesn't have a whole lot of scripture. But we need to, that's why we're reading Genesis chapter 1. That's why we're reading Romans chapter 1, verse 20 when 2 weeks ago. Because these are things that the Bible is going to be clear of. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 3. How just the words framed the world. He just said it into existence. And these are the things that we know. But nobody is going to believe us if they're non-believers. If they're not godly people and they don't have nothing to do with God, you got to get into their logic first. You got to get into them at their ground level. And that's why we're doing this. We want to get to them at ground level. Any other comments? I thought I saw a hand. Richard, I'm sorry.
I just want to back up a little bit to Romans 1:20, where it says, for since the creation of the world, well, how I read it is like, we can see all the attributes He created in the stars, the skies, the birds, the trees, all these things. But then He says His invisible attributes are clearly seen. So there's some things that are invisible to our eye that we cannot see. And then He says, being understood by the things that are made, which I think about viruses, bacteria, things we can't see with our naked eye, but we can see them through a microscope.
There's a lot of things that we cannot see from day to day. But we see it as it shows us. Like for instance, today is spring, right? 2 months ago it was pretty cold outside, right? It changes daily. In a couple of more months it's going to be hotter than hot out here. It's the seasons changing, for instance. How do you look in the mirror and say to yourself, wow, man, I'm getting a day older? Right? We don't see ourselves changing. We don't see it. You know, one of my best examples is when you don't see someone's kid for a long time. You know how it is? Oh, how old is your son now? Oh, he's 14. Whoa, I remember when he was this big, right? And as you're watching someone's kid grow up, when we're watching that child grow up, like people that grow up in the church, and you see that kid every week, you're not watching him grow, but a person that hasn't shown up for 5 years, oh, is that so-and-so? I didn't even recognize them. Because you don't see it happening. That's what it comes down to. You don't see it while it's happening. There's a lot of things we don't see that are invisible, but it's happening. Things that we think about, our thoughts. Like people will always use the expression, well, I don't believe in God because I don't see Him. Right? You can't believe in everything that you have to see. Do you see the oxygen that we're breathing right now? Right? Do you see it? I don't see it, but I believe it. If I go like this and I'm thinking about something, do you believe that I'm thinking about something? Maybe because my eyebrows are going like this, right? Yeah, he's thinking about something. You can't see it, right? Can you see how much I love my family right now just by me standing here? No, but I do. Some things you cannot see.
Can we see that you have a brain?
Yeah, can you? No, we have to cut it open first and pick at it to see if it works. You're right. Some things you can't see. Brother Orlando.
You know, Apostle Paul made it very clear in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, that we walk by faith.
And not by sight.
Yes.
Ready? Page 7. The second reason to believe in God. Life demands a life giver. And we had just finished that in Genesis on the 3rd day, right? That things reproduce from themselves, right? Things do not just change and happen. Once again, if I had a rock over here, is that rock going to turn into a human? Of course it sounds ridiculous. But to believe that there was a Big Bang Theory and all of a sudden here you are today is just as ridiculous. Because at least I started with a rock. At least I started with a rock. And I'm saying a rock's going to turn into human, where the scientist says there was nothing, and then all of a sudden there was something, and now there's a Big Bang. Right? So I kind of gave it a shortcut even when I said this rock's going to turn into a human. That's not the case. Life demands a life giver. Any volunteer? Thank you.
Life demands a life giver in the material universe. Life arises from previously existing life of its own kind. Life cannot spontaneously generate from non-living chemicals. Thus, a supernatural intelligent mind must have created living organisms. Life does not pop into existence from nothing. Neither the puppy at the pound nor the bacteria on the doorknobs spontaneously generated. Every scientist, whether theist or atheist, knows this observation to be true. In biology, one of the most widely recognized laws of science is the law of biogenesis. Biogenesis is composed of two words, bio, which means life, and genesis, which means beginning. Thus, this law deals with the beginning of life, and it simply says that in nature, life comes only from previous life of its own kind. Over the years, the truthfulness of this law has been documented by thousands of scientists, one of the most famous of whom was Louis Pasteur. His work dealt with a crushing blow to the notion of spontaneous generation. In 1933, evolutionist John Sullivan admitted that it became an accepted doctrine that life never arises except from life. So far as the actual evidence goes, this is still the only possible conclusion. Okay, but that was 1933. As we move further into the 20th century, the obvious question was, is it still the only possible conclusion? What have we learned since the days of Louis Pasteur in the 19th century and John Sullivan in the first half of the 20th century? Observational science has reached the same conclusion, experiment after experiment, year after year. The eminent evolutionist George Gaylord Simpson and his colleagues observed that there is no serious doubt that biogenesis is the rule, that life comes only from other life, that a cell, the unit of life, is always and exclusively the product of offspring of another cell. Evolutionist Martin Moe noted that a century of sensational discoveries in biological science has taught us that life arises only from life. More recently, staunch evolutionist Neil Shubin conceded the following in his book titled Your Inner Fish. I will share with you one true law that all of us can agree upon. This law is so profound that most of us take it completely for granted, yet it is the starting point for almost everything we do in paleontology, developmental biology, and genetics. This biology law of everything is that every living thing on the planet has parents. Every person you've ever known has biological parents, as does every bird, salamander, or shark you have ever seen. To put it in more precise form, every living thing sprang from some parental genetic information.
We'll stop right there. That's pretty clear about how we reproduce, how we came to be, right? We know, we that believe in God and we that believe in the Bible know that Adam and Eve were created by God. He took nothing, well, he took the dirt. By that time he already got to the world, but he took the dirt and he created Adam. He took the rib and created Eve. We know where the first man and the first woman comes from. But what does the scientist got to say about who was the first man? They think that by going back so many millions of years, that eventually we go back into a prehistoric man, right? And we go back a little bit farther back and you got another type of prehistoric man, and eventually we get into apes. I mean, that's what they're saying, right? If apes turn into prehistoric men, and prehistoric men turn into another prehistoric man, and then we became a civilized man, how come there's still apes out there? How come? How come there's still apes out there? Right? They're supposed to be changing into man, right? Late bloomers? They haven't reached puberty yet. I mean, think about that. If things are changing in evolution, then it should be changing.
Right.
It should be changing. But it's not changing. Because God created everybody and everything according to what He saw fit and what He saw to be good. And that's what it comes down to. no matter how you look at it, even the scientists here, that's why it's really important to know what scientists think about what's going on. They're saying that life gives life. They're saying that the only way that a person can come from is from their parents.
Right.
Right?
Come on, man.
And we know where Adam comes from. When we look in the book of genealogy, right, in Luke, it goes back with Jesus. And Jesus was the son of, and the son of, and the son of, and it goes back, and goes back, and goes back, and it goes all the way back to Noah, it goes back, Abraham, Noah, and it goes all the way down, and then it says, and he was the son of Adam, who is the son of God.
That's right. True.
That's what the Bible tells us. That's where we come from. We did not come from, I'm going to keep using the expression a rock. Because a rock had to turn into a living thing and then eventually became a human. It doesn't work like that. Because if rocks turned into humans after 14 billion years, why do we still have rocks? I know, late bloomers.
Oh, no. Dennis, everyone knows, science and people who aren't in science realizes that the earth is dying. It's dying.
Right.
And the good question to ask an atheist is, why is it dying and not regenerating into something else?
Well, that was the last chapter we talked about in the second law of thermodynamics, that everything is wearing itself down.
Right, I remember that. But
Okay?
yeah, why, they have to answer, why is the earth dying and not regenerating or morphing into something else? Why is it dying?
Because there's a beginning and there's an end.
Oh, I know that. But
Right, and that's why it has to go back. It has to go back to where did the beginning come from? It comes from God. And who is going to see to it that there's going to be an end? It's going to be God when He sends Jesus. That's what it comes down to. Any other comments? No comments? Anybody bring a rock today? Okay, next reader. Anybody else want to read? Go ahead, Ruby. The importance of Schumann's concession. The bottom of page 8.
Oh, sure, okay. The importance of Schumann's concession must not be missed. He recognizes that the actual scientific information verifies that life in the natural world must come from previously existing life. And yet he refuses to carry that fact to its proper conclusion, that life could not have sprung from non-living chemicals. Materialistic evolution cannot adequately account for or explain that most basic laws of science, not the least of which is the law of biogenesis. If it is the case that the only conclusion which scientific evidence demands is that in nature, life never arises except from life, then, pray tell, how did the first life come into being? Did it somehow break the most fundamental natural law of biology and arise naturally from non-life? Or is there another possibility? The truth is, there is another possibility which science has not disproved, but it is one that evolutionists such as John Sullivan admitted that scientific men find very difficult to accept. According to Sullivan, so far as the actual evidence goes, biogenesis is still the only possible conclusion. But it is a conclusion that seems to lead back to some supernatural creative act. Do not miss the point. Real, true, operational science indirectly supports a supernatural creative act, which implies a supernatural creator. Keep going.
Yeah, why don't you finish this paragraph into our third area?
Evolutionists and Harvard University Professor George Wall similarly admitted in an article he wrote titled The Origin of Life that ultimately there are two options for life's origin. One, spontaneous generation, and two, the only alternative to believe in a single primary act of supernatural creation. There is no third position. Sadly, most modern biologists have reviewed with satisfaction that the downfall of the spontaneous generation hypothesis are unwilling to accept the alternative belief in special creation. So rather than follow the evidence where it ultimately leads to a supernatural creator, atheists would rather put their confidence in a theory that was disproven long ago. Anthony Flew, who for 5 decades was the world's leading atheist thinker, was forced in the end to conclude the only satisfactory explanation for the origin of such indirect self-replicating life as we see on Earth is an infinitely intelligent mind.
Intelligent mind. It had to be, because we have intelligent design. It has to come from mind. So this, we just concluded the second reason. Life demands a life giver. And I like the way, like if you look at page 8, you know, he's actually done the highlighting for us in the book where it says biogenesis is the rule. That life comes only from other life. It goes down and says that life arises only from life. It goes down again and says everything on the planet had parents. I mean, we didn't even have to highlight it. He's done it for us. So, any comments on this? Nobody? No comments? It's pretty clear that life comes from life. You'll never see anything dead reproduce. You never. Dead things do not reproduce. You can't. So, if biogenesis, the people that believe in the beginning of life, tell you that everything has to have its own reproduction system, and it all comes from something that's alive, and that everyone had parents, that's science right there. Somewhere along the line, they got to go back far enough into the 1 billion years, the 10 billion years, the 14 billion years, and say, where did the life start? From nothing. It had to have some type of start. And the answer should not be, well, that's interesting. That's interesting. I want to stop here right now. This way, next week we'll go into design demands a designer. We're a couple of minutes ahead of time from the class because I don't want to start that thought and have it broken. Is there any other comments before we dismiss at this time?
You heard the saying, I know you did, nothing could come from nothing, and wait, nothing could ever come from nothing. I messed it up. Anyway, nothing could come from nothing. But I forget how there's a little tune like that. Nothing can come from nothing because nothing ever could come.
Nothing from nothing is nothing. You guys sing it. If you sing it, then you got it. But we know what you're saying. Nothing cannot come from nothing.
Yeah. Because nothing ever could come from.
Right. Would you dismiss us in our closing prayer?